Welcome to the AngelsWin Podcast with former Angels broadcaster Victor Rojas, featuring Jeff Stoddart and Chuck Richter. And now it's time to talk about some baseball. Victor, take it away.
Victor doesn't need to take it away. I'll take it from here. Welcome, everyone.
As you should, Jeff.
As I should.
Yeah.
Welcome to episode 41 of the AngelsWin Podcast. My name is Jeff Stoddart. I'll be your cruise director for the evening. With me, as always, AngelsWin.com founder Chuck Richter.
Julie McCoy. You're the Julie McCoy of our podcast.
There you go. More of a gopher, maybe.
Gopher.
And Victor Rojas. Nice. Remember Gopher? Isn't that his name?
Yeah. He became
Gopher.
a congressman, too, if I remember correctly.
That's right. He did.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Then again, anybody could be a congressman.
Right.
Or woman.
Certainly not much going on in politics these days, so we can skip right past that. But welcome, gentlemen. It's been a while. Cheers.
Salud.
Cheers.
Salud. How are you doing? Everyone doing well?
Doing well. Everybody having a good summer?
Oh, yeah.
Can't complain.
Yeah.
I mean, I could, but nobody cares, but whatever.
There you go. All right.
Puerto Vallarta here next week. So have any of you guys been there?
No.
I have not.
Yeah,
No.
Speaking of the Love Boat, wasn't that usually one of their main stops was Puerto Vallarta?
I believe so.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yes. I think so.
So,
well, let's see.
How's your summer?
July. Mine's good. It's hot, too hot. Everyone thinks Colorado is nice and cool. We're going to be up at like 100, high 90s, low hundreds the next couple of days, which sucks, but
it's a dry heat, right?
It's a dry heat.
And you know what? You guys can suck on the dry heat. I just got back from Vegas and Laughlin visiting my son, and it was almost 120. And I'm sorry, when you can cook an egg on the sidewalk, that's too hot.
I like going out to the desert in the summertime. I like going to, whether it's Palm Springs or Vegas, because you go outside, you drink, you just sit in the pool. There's nothing you can do. I mean, you try to lay out, it's literally like 3 minutes, and you're like, okay, I need to get in the water.
Go back in the pool.
You just sit in the pool the whole time.
But the pool doesn't even feel refreshing because it gets so hot.
It doesn't. It's warm.
I mean, jump in the pool, it's like 85 degrees. And
that's what's nice about Laughlin, because you can just dip in the Colorado River, and that's cold. Trust me, it's cold.
There you go.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But we digress.
We digress. So, July 23rd, in the year of our Lord 2024, the Angels are back from the All-Star break, off to
with a vengeance.
Back with a vengeance. They're so far ahead of their season average. They're 2-2, so a 500 record coming out of the break. They've got two more against the Seattle Mariners, which is cool. And big news for the team tonight is Mike Trout will be making his first rehab assignment start for the Salt Lake City Bees, squaring off against the mighty El Paso Chihuahuas. So if you're able to tune into that one, but hoping for good things there. Chuck, what do you think? We got a trade deadline upon us.
Yeah, and I figured that would be the focus of
how's that for a handoff?
Yeah.
Go get him, Chuck.
Yeah.
This
I
is
mean,
what happened. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty to talk about, because I think this could be the first trade deadline where the Angels have the most tradable pieces. And hopefully, they get a good return. The problem is on the starting pitching market, you got Tyler Anderson, who's got a sub-3 RA, but you got other guys in play like Jack Flaherty, you got Screwball, you got Garrett Crochet, you got other guys those guys are premier top of the line starters. So it's not like Tyler Anderson's going to be like the main get, right, for a team. Carlos Estevez could be, he could give us our biggest return if the Angels don't trade Luis Rengifo, which I hope they kind of keep, because I want him to be a part of this young nucleus going forward. Problem is we only have him on contract through next season. So if they can't get an extension done, then you got to start thinking about, I mean, obviously they should approach him with an extension. And then if he declines and if he wants to test free agency, just play out his contract with the Angels, you got to move him. As painful for me as it would be, because I'm a big fan of his. You got Taylor Ward, but he's kind of stunk, but he's kind of, over the past, 6 weeks or so, but he's starting to come back a little bit here. Who knows? I mean, if he just goes on a surge, like a crazy streak until, the deadline, maybe you get somebody for him, but I don't know. I mean, you got some other guys too, but I think that I think this is a chance, hopefully, for the Angels to make up for what they didn't do last season at the deadline, and you could argue even the season before.
Yeah.
And the problem with last offseason, not only did they not trade Ohtani and kind of plan for the future, and they could have gotten a haul for him, they traded prospects away, and it's just disappointing. So hopefully they can make up for that. I think, and we'll talk about this later, that they had a pretty good draft. Initially, I was kind of frowned upon it, but the more I dug into the players that the Angels got and drafted, I'm actually pretty positive. I'm feeling pretty positive post-draft. So what do you think, Victor?
As far as the trade deadline, you saw that, I guess Jeff Passan put some stuff out there regarding, the Angels possibly being active. The question is like making sure that you are not trying to swing for the fences to make up for the screw up of last year, right? And maybe over asking for something to try to, like I said, just try to right a wrong. If you are feet on the ground and understand what the value of the individual is that you're trading, and what the expectation is as far as the return, then, I've said, I don't know, 2 months ago, if it's not bolted to the deck, again, keeping the Love Boat theme going, if it's not bolted to the deck, ship them out. That's you've got nothing to lose other than more and more games, because that's kind of the way the Angels have been going the last couple of years. And so I think it makes sense. I think the Rengifo thing, look, I get that it's attractive and the like, but his value is never going to be any higher than it is right now. And so, if you really want him in 2 years when he becomes a free agent, or after next year, if you trade him, then you can make a play for him at that point. You've got to look at not only the here and now, what you have in your farm system, but like, what is your timetable, right? Because you've got to look at the entirety of the 40-man roster and where everybody is at in relation to their individual timelines, meaning, after 3 years in the system, you got to be asked to be, or you got to be put on the 40-man roster, and as it relates to the trajectory of the organization. Ideally, you want some guys that are some veterans. You got some guys that are in the middle there on the 40-man roster, and then you got guys that just came on the 40-man roster. Plus, you've got depth in the minor leagues. Well, for the Angels, you got nothing in the minor leagues, virtually nothing at the minor league level. And then you've got this kind of discombobulated 40-man roster from a talent perspective and from a service time perspective. And so that's where I think is the hardest part of how do you do this. And that's where I figured last year would have been the perfect time to trade Ohtani, not push your chips in, and give guys away, whether they're great prospects or otherwise. You didn't have an abundance to trade from. And so you're trying to give yourself as much of an advantage as possible, and supplementing the newer guys in the system from the draft so that they fall in line with that 40-man trajectory of, hey, we're going to be competitive in 20. If we find competitiveness in 25, great, but 26 is really the day that we're shooting for. And like, where is everybody's timeline on that 40-man roster or guys that aren't on the 40-man roster as it relates to that 2026, 27, 28, right? And so that everything hits all at the same time. And then you can manage the financial burdens of it as well, right? Because those, you get guys that go off early. Logan O'Hoppe is going to start costing you some money, right?
Yep.
Based on arbitration, maybe a lot quicker than you had hoped. And so so there's a number of things, and I know I'm going on different things, different rants, but as it relates to trade deadline, you absolutely have to move guys that have value to them, and or guys that maybe don't have the value per se today than they had, 365 days ago, maybe a Taylor Ward. And what can you get in return? Everybody on a major league team has value to a certain extent, right? It's all in the eyes of the beholder. What I view as a type A prospect may be viewed as a type C prospect by one organization, type D prospect, no prospect by every varying organization, because we all grade differently, right? We all evaluate differently. And so that's why you can never be too in love with your guys. You can love your guys to a certain point where you say, hey, the value on this guy is X, and I want to make sure that I get as close as possible to this, and so that you don't get shortchanged. And I think that's the biggest key to all of this, is making sure that the return fits in line with whatever it is that the Angels are building, because we have no idea, right? Because it's, according to Jeff Passan, everyone's available, and they should be, but nobody's been willing to say, hey, we're kind of in a quote unquote rebuild or retooling or reimagining, as freaking Jerry DiPoto once said about the Seattle Mariners. We're reimagining the roster. They've been reimagining it for 7-8 years now.
That sounds very Disney-esque.
Well, it's such a tired thing. But whatever that is, I think that's the biggest key, is for the fan base to buy in. You got to get the fan base to buy in somehow. Right. And if you're happy with your draft, then you better make sure that you strike some gold, from a national media perspective, right? Where they grade these things out after the fact, because you can sell that to any fan base. You could sell that to, because you really don't know what a draft is going to give you for 2, 3, 4 years down the road, depending on who you draft. You really, from a prospect perspective, you don't really know unless there's a main guy that could make a difference next year, right? Everyone else is just going to be names that you're going to be doing research on. And so I just want to make sure that, the hope is, of course, not trying to be negative Nelly, the hope is that there is some hope that the Angels actually, and maybe they are starting to listen to Perry or whatever the case may be, but that you give a fan base some hope going forward, because it's just been the same old, stuff for the last couple of years. So that's what I think.
Chuck, let me ask you real quick as kind of a follow-up onto this. 2 weeks from now, we're sitting in the podcast and we're talking about what transpired. What would you look at the deadline being a failure? The deadline is a failure if the Angels don't move who? Like, who do you really want to see them move? Not because you don't want them, but because you feel like that's where, these are the 3 or 4 guys that we're going to get the most from. And if we still have them the first week of August, they drop the ball again.
If they don't move any of the expiring contracts, like Carlos Estevez, right? The relief pitchers that we have, the Hunter Stricklands, the Luis Garcias, right? Brandon Drury has had an absolute shit-tastic season this year. We're not going to get much for him, but you never know. You have to deal him, right? He's not coming back, and so you have to. Some team may have an injury, or they have some depth issues in their infield, and they may want to buy in on the fact that Brandon Drury had 2 good seasons in a row prior to this season. So, you have to move all those guys. I think you got to move Tyler Anderson. I think his contract is cheap. Um, and I think that, you get him for the stretch run, right, for a playoff contending team and all of next year. And I mean, he's not a top of the rotation guy, but he showed with the Dodgers and 2 years ago, and he showed with the Angels this year that he can be a valuable middle of the rotation guy that actually eats innings and can put the team in a position to win. So you got to look at that. You got to look at, to Victor's point, Taylor Ward in whole. I mean, there could, between now and July 30th, there could be a significant injury of a playoff contending team in left field. And they may look at Taylor Ward and say, he's struggled, but here's a guy that will have him on contract, right, for a couple years. And he's a guy that's proven that he can hit, he can produce outside of his recent slump. And, I think those are the guys. And so if, you take all those players I mentioned, outside of maybe Taylor Ward, right? I think if they don't deal any of those guys, or they don't deal all of those guys, it's a failure, because we're not getting them back, right? Tyler Anderson has value as a guy, as I mentioned. You get him this year and next year, and he's got a pretty relative cheap contract in comparison to other middle of the rotation starters, right? And so I think you have to deal those guys, or it's an absolute failure.
I think you could
Victor,
look at.
would you agree?
Well, I was just going to say, I think you could look at Tyler and say, you know what? Because his contract is affordable, and because, and again, it's all based on not just the numbers he's putting up, but the evaluation of the staff. Barry and Wash, and what they feel like. Has he really turned the corner? A true evaluation, right? Of, does he have value to you personally as an organization? And so, because that contract is where it's at, I think you can probably sit there and go, you know what? He's a guy, besides Luis, that I think that I think I might ask for a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And if I get stuck with him, am I really getting stuck with him? You know what I mean?
Right.
Because I need a guy in the middle of my rotation. I need a guy that's going to eat innings, and his numbers pretty decent. So I can live with the fact it's not a loss.
It's not.
I wouldn't just trade him. Now, if you're just shedding salary, that's completely different, right? If you're really stripping it down, that's a completely different model and different way of looking at it. But that's how I would look at the Tyler Anderson situation. If his number was a little bit larger, in the 17, 18 range or whatever, then it'd be like, yeah, I might push the envelope, but I might break and say, you know what? Because you assign value to everybody, right? As far as what you think they're worth from a monetary standpoint. And clearly, last year he did not play up to his contract. Now he's playing above his contract. So it's like, where's the sweet spot? Is this the outlier? And so it's like, that's the hard part. But look,
right.
if you're good with it from an evaluation standpoint as an organization, it's like, okay, we'll push the envelope. And if we're stuck with them, and I use that in air quotes, then okay, we can live with that. Cool. You try to make up the value elsewhere with other pieces that you may have.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's fair to say with Tyler Anderson that either way, I mean, if they don't deal him, it'll be a little disappointing, but at the same time, at least, you still can trade him in the offseason too, right?
Yeah.
So you got that. Or, depending on what they do in the offseason, they may say, well, we need a Tyler Anderson in the middle of our rotation, or it'll probably be at the top of the rotation, because they don't really have a top of the rotation guy. So
yeah. Nor do I think they're going to go out and get one.
I don't think so either. Artie's never proven to spend any money on any starting pitching, sadly. So
there was Joe Blanton.
Yeah,
the key.
Yeah,
the key.
That offseason, Joe Blanton, Ryan Madsen, Sean Burnett, and who else?
We did a 30-minute show from ESPN Zone at Disneyland.
I remember that. Yes,
with the five guys and Sosha, and that was our offseason. Good times.
How was it putting a
Madsen was
lipstick
coming
on
back
that
from
pick?
injury. Madsen was coming back from injury, did nothing, and then
Burnett never pitched for the Angels.
Burnett
He
was
had an
hurt.
injury as well.
Yeah, but Madsen, did the Angels release him, or I'm trying to think. Anyways, the following year, I think, wasn't he an All-Star with the Nationals? Maybe.
Well, I know he was really productive with the Phillies prior to that signing.
No. I'm talking about after the injury. He did nothing with the Angels because he was rehabbing the injury. I just memory serves. He went to,
I think so.
I think the Nationals, and then the Dodgers signed him.
Yeah.
After that.
Yeah.
We spent a couple bucks on C.J. Wilson too.
Yeah. Yeah.
There you go, Chuck. There's some starting pitching cash. All right, moving on. So since our last podcast, because we're trying to stay in a tight window tonight, everybody. So we had the draft. We had the MLB draft, and the three of us kind of had a text string going along as the days were going by. So Chuck, you kind of started off the podcast earlier saying that initially you weren't real thrilled with how it went, but you've gone back, and it sounds like kind of rethought your initial feelings about it. Are you just drinking the Kool-Aid, or do you feel like you actually have a new outlook on some of these guys that they got? And if so, which ones are you most excited about?
I'm excited about Christian Moore. I really am. And Victor knows this. I mean, I was in our text thread, I wanted Braden Montgomery, right? I thought he would be the guy that the Angels should have grabbed. He went later after Christian Moore, but he's got injury concerns, right, with his ankle and whatnot, and there's questions whether he's going to hit, whatever. Christian Moore's got some question marks as well, but I mean, you don't find too many second basemen that can hit for average and club 33 home runs, and maybe play at there's some questions about his defense, but I mean, Howie Kendrick came up through the system, and there's questions about his defense as well. I remember going back, and the fans were like, "Oh, we got to dump Adam Kennedy, and we got to bring up Howie Kendrick. Free Howie Kendrick. But Kennedy played a really good second base, and there was questions about Howie Kendrick's defense at second base, and he came up and proved to work hard and do well. And I think that Christian Moore, through with the leadership and the defensive guru that Ron Washington and his team that he has, I think that Christian Moore can become that player that Howie Kendrick became as well. Now, is he going to hit for high average? We'll see. I think he's more of a 260, 270 player hitter. But I mean, if you can hit 25 to 35 home runs as a second baseman, that's a lot of production right there. Going on, and you look at the arms that the Angels grabbed in the 3 rounds after that, there's some things to look at. Like Cortez, they're going to try to let him get stretched out as a starter, but worst case scenario, he could be a really good closer, right? If it doesn't come together for him as a starter. And there's a lot to like about Ryan Johnson and Ryan Prager, and there's a lot of guys that have that, the Angels went off, the Angels went specifically for guys that were, had good sliders, had good, fastballs and with movement, and high plus is what they're calling it. And so I think that you look at these guys that they have, and then there's reason for excitement. They need some pitching. Obviously, they went full pitching right on this draft. There was only a handful of position players outside of Christian Moore, which to me was kind of crazy, because when you look at the Angels farm system, it's really barren with position players. So I thought they were going to go that route. But these guys that I mentioned, the Pragers and the Ryan Johnson and the Cortez, these guys can move quickly, just like a Chase Silseth, and Joyce. And so we may, and, obviously Christian Moore as well. So, the verdict's still out. I mean, you can never judge a draft. I mean, you can place a grade on it if you want, but let's face it, you can't really give a real grade on a draft until maybe 3, 4, 5 years later.
Victor, what are your Prager was one that in our text string that Chuck seemed excited about, and you had some concerns as to whether or not they could sign him, like that the financial piece might be a challenge.
Yeah, he hasn't signed yet, right?
I think he's the only one that hasn't signed yet.
Right.
I can check.
Well, because he's a draft eligible sophomore, so he's got some leverage. He could go back easily and make some money and NIL money and the like, and the way things are changing in the college landscape. I don't know that he will, but I'm just saying that there's that possibility.
Sure.
And I like Ryan. I think Ryan is. What's that?
He hasn't signed. Yeah.
He hasn't signed.
Both Ryan Johnson and Ryan Prager have not signed yet.
Yeah, so Prager, interesting guy out of Dallas, and he's not an overpowering guy. Really, he's a guy that fills up the strike zone, and is. I like him. There's some pitchability to him. Can he uptick in velocity? I don't know. Spins the ball well. Great demeanor. He's a big leaguer from the way he handles himself. Very articulate, smart. You can tell he's a cerebral dude. So I like him from that perspective, and the way that he, I think he's a 5-6 inning guy at the big leagues. Maybe if he learns, maybe a changeup and really can dominate off speed, but maybe he can stretch him out. He reminds me a lot of, and I don't know why we're going on this Prager thing, but he reminds me a lot of, because I had the A&M series. For some reason, I look at him is the way he looks like Kershaw. He reminds me of Kershaw. Yeah. Just the way he throws the ball, the way he finishes delivery. I'm not saying stuff and the like, but that's who I think of. And he's obviously from Dallas and like Clayton is. But so that's my 2 cents on Prager. Chris Cortez, I like him as a reliever. He was inconsistent last year. This year he was much better. I don't see the whole conversion to a starter. He can eat up innings, but he can also become erratic. I mean, as good as he was, I think he went 6 1/3 in the game against Oregon, which they needed because their starter, A&M starter, got hurt. The lefty got hurt against Oregon, and he was unbelievable. He was unhittable. Oregon had no chance. So I can see where the appeal would be to try to stretch him out, but I think he's more of a short kind of empty the tank guy. But he can get out of sync. That happened in the College World Series against Tennessee of all teams. And so, you temper the excitement there, but I like the arm. I like the moxie. And truth be told, if you're smart, if you're the Angels, I'd find out, go down to the arm farm in Houston, in the Houston area, and find out what their pitching coach was able to do to kind of to really turn the corner with Cortez from last year to this year. And I think that's the biggest thing for me on him, and just try to milk that as much as possible. And as far as the first round pick in Braden Montgomery versus Christian Moore, I like Christian Moore. Look, they picked Christian Moore because he was going to be undervalued, right? Under slot, so that they can use the money elsewhere. That's really what that boils down to. At least that's how I see it. I like him as a player. I still would have liked Braden Montgomery if you're going best available at that time. I think, you talk about a switch hitter, corner outfielder, big arm, and a guy that could, if the offensive side didn't work, you could put him on the mound. He's that good of an arm. And I just like his overall playability. Christian can get out of the zone. He can chase quite a bit. And as far as the defensive side, yeah, I could see the Howie Kendrick thing. The difference between Howie Kendrick and Christian Moore is that Howie was a pure hitter in the minor leagues. Like, that was his tool, was he could hit. He could hit for average, and he could hit for extra bases. He could slug. And You knew that he had the potential to be a 300. Well, he was a career 298 hitter with 1,000 doubles. It seemed like, and occasionally can hit the ball out of the ballpark. He was very choppy footwork wise defensively, but hey, when you're that good of a hitter, it's not like Jeff Kent was the elite defender, but he was that good of a hitter.
Right.
So that's my sense on that. Doesn't make him a bad pick. It just means that, hey, you're looking at the position wise a little bit different than everything else. So, like overall, if the high school kid that they picked out of Colorado ends up, turning into something special, I think that's great. But high school kids, you really, especially high school arms, you really just got to wait and see how they end up kind of panning out once they get to the minor leagues and the development levels.
Yeah. All right. Well, guys, we hit the trade deadline. We hit the draft. Anything else we want to cover before we wrap this thing up?
Well, let's hit our mailbag. Did I cut out?
You cut out for a little bit, but you didn't miss much.
You dropped and came back in. So, all right, we'll do a couple.
Yeah, I don't know what happened, but just
hey, when nature calls, brother, you got to go. It's all good, Chuck. Gotta get short.
All right. So Jason from Saratoga Springs, New York wants to know, should Adele be moved up in the order at all? And I will add to that, is Adele someone that they should have on the trading block over the next week?
Well, they should have had him on the trading block for the last 4 years, but yeah. Well, why not? I, nothing against Joe. It's just like...
No. And I think this goes back to, is Joe one of those guys that if come the first week of August, he's still on the team, did we miss something? Like, is now the time to move him, or has that ship passed?
I sorry, Chuck, I'll jump here real quick. I think that with Joe, the question is going to become, how other teams view him, of who is he and what his potential is. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it's almost like you've showcased too much of him to still have that prospect, label to him. And then you hope that somebody sees a Bronco, out on the field somewhere and say, I could turn that into something, a diamond in the rough.
Yeah.
And so I think it's hard to figure out what his trade value is. But again, it's all in the eye of the beholder. I mean, there could be development folks with other organizations, and maybe within the Angels too. Maybe that's why they hold on to it. But there may be development folks that sit there and go, hey, I think we could do something with him. And I've said this before, whether it's Joe or anybody else, as an organization, you have to determine, at some point, you've got to make a determination on each of your players. Like, it's time to crap or get off the pot, fish or cut bait. It's like, it's okay to say that within our organization and our structure, we've done everything we could to get him to a certain point. It's just not happening. And it's time to move on. There's nothing wrong with that. It happens all the time. But to hold on to guys because, he was a first round pick, or, the promise, but at some point it's like, hey, you've seen enough. You've seen the at-bats. You've seen the defense. It's like, I think you have a pretty good indication of who that individual is, whether it's Joe or anybody else. You've got to make that determination to kind of figure out what it is that you want to do going forward.
Chuck?
Yeah, he's looked better. I mean, last 15 days, he's, hitting 261. I mean, last 7 days, 429, 556 on base percentage, 619 slug. But those are small sample sizes, right?
Sounds like you're saying its trade value will never be this high.
Fans are going to look at these little trends, right? And they're going to think, oh, he's finally, realized his talent, and he's going to, take off from here. But we've said this with Joe way too many times. If you get a really good offer, I don't think Perry will. I don't think there's any player that's not tradable, that Perry's going to say no to, except for like a Hoppy, right? Zach Neto. Obviously, Trout's not going anywhere. But I mean, we like to dream on these guys that are first round picks, top prospects. And, Joe's had his struggles, to Victor's point. But again, there shouldn't be, I don't think there's going to be disappointment if he's not, to answer your question, Jeff, if he's not traded. But, it's just, we'll see. I mean, the jury is still out on Joe. It just goes, dude. I mean, he had a nice start to the season.
Just remember, you don't have to look at it as an remember, you don't have to look at guys as an individual, right? From a trade perspective. I mean, you can package guys.
Right.
And I think that's how you have to look at it. And whether it's with a minor league guy or with another big league guy, I mean, you just have to be creative. Just have to think outside the box, knowing what it is that you're seeking out, what your needs are, which for the Angels, it's every box needs to be filled at the minor league level and perhaps at the major league level as well. So yeah, you just have to look at it that way as well.
Oh, yeah. What else you got, Jeff?
One more. We'll do one more. Paul from Templeton, California. He says that Detmers, who Jeff Passon's mentioned today, as a possible trade candidate. And Paul says, it makes no sense to me. If he can't start, he's a high-end power left-handed reliever who's under team control through 2027. Am I crazy? Why are they looking to move somebody like him? So I'll do this as a jump ball. Well, thoughts on moving Detmers to the pen and having him come out of the bullpen as opposed to trying to continue to push him to be a starter?
I think the thought with Reed Detmers, Jeff, is that some teams may take him on as a reclamation project because he is a former, he has shown success at the big league level, right? He's got good stuff, and former first round draft pick of the Angels, and maybe in the right system, maybe, when teams get together, when they talk trades or when they're thinking about guys that they like, a lot of times the coaching staff has pulled in and said, I can fix that guy. I know exactly what his issue is mechanically. We can fix him. You need to try to go after this person or that person. So, and so that could be a scenario where you would see him dealt. But, I don't know. I think his value as a reliever, I mean, he's, I think he's got to figure things out if they don't trade him in the minors, and he needs consistency. And Victor, you've talked about this 100 times, that the Angels need consistent performances out of their young core. And for the Zach Neto this year and Logan O'Hoppe, we've seen that. Nolan Shannon was just drafted last year, so he gets a pass. But they need consistency from these guys. And, Reed Detmers hasn't shown, Griffin Canning hasn't shown this. Patrick Sandoval, before his injury, has not shown any level of consistency. And, it's just, what are you going to do?
Yeah. But your value is going to be a lot better as a starter than than a bullpen piece. The bullpen thought process is if you're going to keep him, if he's going to stay in your system, and you've exhausted all those opportunities from a starter perspective, then you transition him to the bullpen, see if you can get something out of him there, maybe rebuild the value, whatever the case may be. So, it'd be interesting if they do give up on him from that standpoint of, hey, because you do have a new pitching coach and a new philosophy and a new way of looking things. And here's a guy that, pitched a no-hitter in the Big Leagues, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he did.
He did.
Almost pitched the second one too.
Yeah. So if he's regressed and or your guy Barry can't fix him, then which is it? Is it the individual? Is it the philosophy? Is it and so I still think I can't imagine that Reed gets traded unless you get overwhelmed. And again,
right,
I don't have a problem with that. You get overwhelmed, do it, take the deal. Because you got 4s and 5s, right, in your rotation. You're trying to get 1, 2s, and 3s and or fill other needs. So I think if there's value and somebody sees that, absolutely do it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that will wrap up episode 41 of the Angels Win podcast. Gentlemen, good show. I like it.
Gentlemen.
Good stuff.
Likewise.
All right.
Cheers, gentlemen.
Other than my bathroom break.
For Victor Rojas and Chuck Richter, I'm Jeff Stoddard. Good night now.
Do you use dude wipes?
Thank you for listening to the Angels Win podcast with Victor Rojas, Chuck Richter, and Jeff Stoddard. Go Halos and drive home safely.
Say goodbye.